Hello everyone, welcome back. In this video we're gonna talk about Angular interpolation and property binding. Interpolation is any expression that can result as a string at the end. In Angular we can use interpolation to incorporate calculated strings into text between HTML element tags and within attribute assignment. Template expressions are what we use to calculate those strings. Whereas property binding is binding to an HTML element native property with a property from your component class. Next up, I will show you a couple of examples of using interpolation, template expressions, and property binding in Angular. In this first example, I want to display the current logged in user in this blank space here. In our component here, we can create a property of type string and assign the value anonymous to it. Now in our template, we can create a template expression with these double curly braces, and we can pass in the property name of our component class, which in this case is username. Now if we run this, we can see the value of anonymous is being rendered. So we have successfully binded our component class property to our view. Let's take another example of where we use string interpolation as an attribute assignment. So over here, in between the span tags, we're binding to the inner HTML property of the element, and we're passing my favorite color property from our component class. In a scenario like this, we can also use the property binding method, especially if we want to set the element property to a non-string data value, like a boolean value for example, but more on property binding later in this video. Next up, we'll take a look at how we can call in methods. Over here I have a method called getMyPet that returns a string of dog, and when we pass this method in our template expression and run our application, this will obviously render the string of dog together with the rest of the sentence. So in our next example we can see how Angular evaluates whatever we have in the template expression and render that as a string at the end. Here we have a sum of two numbers, 1 plus 1, and in this case we can more clearly see of how Angular works. So what will happen here is Angular will first evaluate whatever is in between the double curly braces, and it will convert the final result as a string. Therefore, when we run this, at the end we will get the number 2 as a result. We can also use ternary operators. For example, here I have a ternary operator checking for what kind of measurement unit we want to use, and in my case, in my component class, I have set the measurement unit to imperial. Therefore, when we run this, I will get miles as a result. Now let's take a look at property binding and distinguish of when to use property binding and when to use string interpolation. As I said before, property binding is binding to an HTML element native property with a property from your component class. And just to briefly show you here, I have logged in the button element, and all these properties that you see here, you can basically bind to any of them. And with property binding, you can not only bind values as string, but also as other non-string values like numbers or boolean values. Let's take a look at this example where I'm binding to the disabled property of this button, and I'm passing in the isDisabled component property, which is of type boolean, and when we run our application, the button will be in a disabled state. So as I said before, with property binding we can bind to any native HTML property of an element, but we can also bind to other components like our custom directives and other custom elements. Now for the question of when to use string interpolation versus property binding, the answer is use property binding if you want to change the property of a directive or an HTML element, and use string interpolation when you just want to print out some text. So that's all for this video. I hope you guys found this interesting. Maybe you learned something new today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.